Between 1764 and 1777, reports circulated from Essex County of a hilltop convent where nightly Latin chants were heard long after the supposed closure of the property. Local clergy dismissed the claims as delusion, and land records listed the structure as vacant. But questions persisted. Who maintained the grounds? Why were deliveries recorded without recipients? And how did one of Massachusetts' most obscure religious institutions remain legally active for 13 years, despite no known residents? The Sancta Resquieta Monastery was formally chartered in 1758 as an enclosed Benedictine outpost, serving as a theological retreat for elite students from Boston. Despite its remote placement outside Salem, it operated with financial support from anonymous donors and was initially praised for its strict canonical discipline. Records show the monastery hosted 4 faculty members and 7 students at its peak, all male. But by 1764, no new entries appear in its registry. A closure was quietly announced by church authorities in Boston, citing internal redundancy. Yet for over a decade after, the institution's legal identity remained intact. Taxes were filed, and maintenance logs were updated annually. Neighbors later testified to hearing regulated chanting in Latin during pre-dawn hours. The site was eventually condemned in 1777 and sealed without formal inspection. The land purchased in 1757 by the Charter for Sacred Academic Discipline was situated 2 miles inland from Salem's northeastern border in a clearing once used for militia drilling but later abandoned. It measured slightly under 30 acres, flanked by thick tree lines and separated from main trade routes by uneven marshland. According to filings preserved in the Essex Colonial Registry, the property was acquired under a multi-tiered ownership agreement involving both the Archdiocese of Boston and a private religious benefactor whose name was redacted on all legal instruments. A singular clause in the acquisition documents permitted the structure's activities to remain exempt from routine inspections, citing permanent academic enclosure under ecclesiastical protection. Construction of the facility began early in 1758 under the supervision of architect Eliphalet Gann, a known builder of rectories and crypt chapels throughout the colony. Gann's journal, stored in the Massachusetts Historical Archive, records unusual design requirements for the project. The central chapel, for instance, lacked an exterior entrance and could only be accessed through an underground corridor linked to the east wing. Additionally, the dormitories were built with triple-latched interior locks, but no visible method of egress from the outside. Gann noted the blueprints came from Rome, but had been translated locally through intermediaries who declined to identify their ecclesiastical affiliations. The convent, officially titled Sancta Resquieta Monastery, held its consecration service in March of 1759. The officiant, Auxiliary Bishop Antonius Weller, filed no homily or procedural description of the event, a departure from standard protocol for dedicating new monastic sites. Parish newspapers from the time referenced the event only once, describing it as a private vow commencement, and noting that no laity were present. The order stationed there identified as academic Benedictines, with vows limited to cloistered study and linguistic preservation. Latin, Greek, and Aramaic texts were stored in the West Wing Library, although subsequent inventory suggests that most remained uncatalogued. By the close of 1760, 7 students and 4 ordained clerics were registered at the monastery. They arrived in staggered intervals over a span of 13 months, transported via unmarked coaches from Boston Harbor. Names were recorded only by initial and province of origin. No family members or sponsors were listed. Letters submitted by Essex postal agents in this period show a recurring pattern. Inbound correspondence from Boston was accepted at the convent gates, but no outbound mail was ever dispatched. This irregularity prompted a short-lived audit in late 1761, but the matter was dropped after intervention by a senior representative of the Archdiocese. The local perception of the convent during its first 3 years remained minimal. The building's position atop an elevated bluff prevented visibility from the main road, and no signage indicated its religious function. A traveling magistrate, Henry Macabre, noted in his 1762 journal, that he mistook the structure for a munitions warehouse due to its stone facade and lack of visible cross or iconography. His entry describes an attempt to speak with an occupant through the side gate, which was answered by a man in clerical robes who communicated only in Latin and declined to admit him. Macabre, not trained in Latin, could not transcribe the exchange. Internal activity during this early phase was sporadically referenced in Boston's academic circles. A Jesuit catalogue published in 1763 under the name Collegium Tome referenced a coastal monastery preserving Ciceronian declamations, though no location was specified. At the same time, archives from a theological seminary in Dedham noted that 2 students originally slated for placement at Sancta Resquieta were reassigned elsewhere due to non-correspondence and failed contact, despite having received preliminary acceptance. No notice of withdrawal or formal retraction was ever issued by the monastery itself. Monastic supply ledgers filed with the Essex Port Authority between 1760 and 1764 show routine purchases of preserved goods, lamp oil, and paper in volumes consistent with a dozen occupants. Orders were placed by a single intermediary known only by the surname Valet, who signed in French and paid in coin rather than colonial script. Valet's identity was never verified beyond his cargo signature, but receipts indicate consistent collection of deliveries at a crossroads 2 miles from the property, with cartage provided independently from the convent itself. No recipient signatures were logged, suggesting that supplies were either dropped or retrieved without contact. By late 1763, discrepancies in parish filings began to surface. An annual diocesan census intended to log active clergy failed to account for 3 of the monastery's initial staff, despite no recorded resignations or deaths. Furthermore, a fire insurance affidavit submitted that year listed the chapel as inactive, even as supply logs continued without reduction. These inconsistencies were flagged by a colonial notary, Lydia Warrington, who submitted a formal query to the Archdiocesan Office in January 1764. The inquiry was returned unacknowledged with no explanatory statement. Warrington later noted in her personal log that the convent appeared maintained and lit, yet without trace of rotation or visible life. Local records confirm that 1764 marked the final year in which any formal documentation was produced by Sancta Resquieta itself. After that point, there were no new registrants, no revisions to property use, and no letters of assignment for new clerics or students. Yet legal documents continued to list the monastery as an active institution. Tax records remained in good standing, property boundaries were maintained, and an annual stipend from the Boston Theological Office continued to be transferred each spring. The disbursement was processed through a deferred holdings account using clerical identifiers rather than personal names. Residents of the nearby hamlet of Cabot's Crossing began reporting unusual auditory phenomena in the autumn of 1765. According to affidavits submitted years later during a local land review, multiple families claimed to hear group vocalizations in a foreign tongue occurring shortly before sunrise on a semi-weekly basis. While most witnesses identified the language as Latin, none could interpret the content. The sounds, described as monotonal and evenly paced, were noted to continue for approximately 40 minutes and ceased abruptly each time. No visible movement on the grounds was reported. In response to these claims, Constable Harold Breck convened a review in 1766 involving 4 independent witnesses stationed at various positions around the convent perimeter. Their notes, preserved in the town records, confirmed auditory presence at the time stated, though none of the participants could determine a source. One observer, placed within 300 feet of the main structure, reported seeing light through upper-floor windows during the chant periods. Attempts to make contact during daytime hours yielded no response. The gates remained closed and unlatched, and the structure displayed no signs of entry or exit traffic. Efforts to involve ecclesiastical authorities were dismissed. A letter from Reverend Ellis Murren of Salem, dated March 1767, detailed his meeting with Bishop Dobbins of Boston, during which concerns about the convent were brought forward. The bishop advised that Sancta Resquieta had been placed under permanent restricted function and no further inquiries were necessary. He discouraged lay contact with the premises and emphasized that the site was not open to secular interpretation. When asked about the nature of the activity inside, Murren recorded that the bishop declined to answer. The fiscal continuation of Sancta Resquieta, despite a lack of visible staff or students, drew the attention of colonial auditor Hugh Levering in 1768. Levering had been assigned to track non-responsive religious estates for the purpose of assessing dormant endowments. His notes, found in the collection of the Essex Oversight Archives, document a 3-week investigation into the financial standing of the monastery. Despite its outward inactivity, Levering found that the site continued to pay municipal fees on time, receive institutional mail, and maintain its official designation as an educational sanctuary. When he submitted a formal audit request to the Ecclesiastical Bursar in Boston, he received a notarized affidavit stating that operations at Sancta Resquieta conform to their original academic charter and remain under internal clerical oversight. Levering's memorandum to the Essex Governor's Office included his estimation that over £1,200 in goods and services had been expended on the site since the last known residency record. He highlighted discrepancies in supply orders, which continued to match the volume required for a dozen persons, including fresh provisions and parchment shipments. Yet neither cartage agents nor post riders could confirm who accepted delivery. A merchant named Robert Elkins, who operated out of the Danvers route station, stated under deposition that his assistants left packages in a designated grove, and upon return, the materials were gone, without trace. No signatures, exchanges, or personal interaction occurred. In parallel with these financial anomalies, maintenance of the grounds was confirmed through indirect observation. Tax records for the adjacent lot owners noted that brush along the monastery's northern border had been cleared in 1769, a task attributed to unknown labor. Visitors who approached the outer fence reported that while the building showed no visible alteration, the walkways remained swept, and no structural decay was evident. A local map maker, Gregory Anson, charted the area in 1770 and made special note of the convent's unusual condition. The premises appear weather-sealed, structurally unblemished, and uniformly intact, though no personnel or signs of habitation are evident. In 1771, a traveling linguistic scholar named Dr. Martin Einsfeld recorded an encounter near the estate while conducting fieldwork on Latin recitation practices in colonial Massachusetts. Einsfeld, who had been gathering samples of regional ecclesiastical dialects, claimed in a letter to his colleague in New Haven that he had stationed himself within listening distance of the convent on multiple occasions during April and May. According to his account, he transcribed portions of the chanting and later cross-referenced them with canonical texts. He identified passages from the Rule of St. Benedict and portions of Psalm 118, though noted they were delivered without harmonic variation and occasionally repeated mid-sequence. Einsfeld submitted the transcription to the Massachusetts Latin Society, but his entry was never published. No copies of the original audio notations have survived. That same year, the Boston Ecclesiastical Commission held a closed session to evaluate land usage within the diocese, prompted by an inquiry from Governor Phipps regarding underutilized assets. Sancta Resquieta appeared on the docket, but the minutes from the session indicate that the convent's records were presented by proxy rather than by any representative of the institution itself. The attending official, Father Josias Dreer, provided notarized proof of occupancy status, referencing entries in a secure registry that was not opened to public review. When one of the commissioners asked why no physical visitations had occurred in over 7 years, Dreer replied that the monastery's charter permitted internal spiritual auditing only, a clause reaffirmed by a sealed document bearing the stamp of a Rome-based tribunal. Despite mounting questions, public response to the monastery remained limited. The broader population of Salem was preoccupied with economic and political changes, and distant religious estates were largely ignored unless taxation or scandal occurred. Sancta Resquieta's reputation, if mentioned at all, was confined to whispered accounts of its perceived oddity. A letter from a merchant's wife in 1772, addressed to her cousin in Marblehead, refers obliquely to that cloister on the rise where lamps still burn by some trick of Providence. The phrasing suggests local awareness of the building's illumination, though no formal complaint or legal claim was ever filed. In May 1773, the Office of Land Steward Malcolm Brewster issued a notice requesting all tax-exempt institutions in Essex County to confirm their operational status via sworn affidavit. A courier dispatched to Sancta Resquieta returned the notice 2 days later, unsigned but accompanied by a vellum sheet bearing the monastery's crest and the Latin phrase in praesenti silentio. Though no further correspondence followed, Brewster archived the document as sufficient under the colonial ecclesiastical exception rule. The crest itself matched prior entries in diocesan heraldry logs, confirming authenticity, though the method of its return, by hand to the courier's satchel during an unattended moment, remained unclarified. By 1774, pressure from new colonial governance structures began to challenge long-standing exemptions. As part of a broader campaign to catalogue all landholders for census reallocation, Reverend Micah Ferris of the Salem Office of Parish Reconciliation requested entry to Sancta Resquieta under the justification of tax recalibration. His letter to Bishop Dobbins outlined a plan for scheduled inspections of all diocesan properties. The bishop acknowledged receipt, but replied that Sancta Resquieta fell under a non-applicable designation due to its non-receptive theological purpose. No visit occurred. The final known individual to attempt access before formal closure was Clerk Maribel Cotter, who had been assigned by the Essex Colonial Title Office to retrieve boundary information for adjacent surveying. In her written account, dated August 1775, Cotter described approaching the convent by foot and finding the outer gate unlatched. Upon entering the grounds, she noted that the grass had been trimmed, the flagstones cleared of debris, and the air carried a faint scent of incense. No voices or movement were detected, though she observed that the chapel's upper windows appeared fogged from within. Cotter did not attempt to enter the structure, and returned her report with the notation, "Estate appears maintained, though no contact established." In 1776, the colony's administrative apparatus shifted as the revolution intensified. Diocesan oversight fragmented, and attention to isolated properties like Sancta Resquieta waned. However, the Boston Office of Religious Holdings, now operating under provisional charter, ordered a final census of all monastic estates for reassignment or dissolution. Sancta Resquieta was flagged for deactivation due to non-compliance and absence of known residents. A closure decree was issued in early 1777 under the authority of interim clerical manager Elias Reed. The notice was sent by courier and affixed to the front gate, where it remained untouched for 3 weeks. When a demolition team arrived in late spring, they found the gate unlocked and the grounds in the same orderly state described by Cotter. The structure, though sealed from the outside, bore no signs of decay. However, access to the interior was blocked at all entry points, and none of the workers could locate a means of ingress. Tools brought to dismantle the entryways proved ineffective, as the materials, though not reinforced, resisted standard disruption. After several hours, Reed instructed that the decree be stapled directly to the outer stone, and the site was formally recorded as condemned. No further attempt was made to enter or evaluate the property. It was listed on the diocesan records as withdrawn from function and marked with the annotation unassessed interior. Following the formal closure of Sancta Resquieta in 1777, no administrative body attempted to repurpose the land. The site remained recorded as ecclesiastical territory under a dormant designation, with no fiscal obligation or reallocation. Its name was omitted from subsequent diocesan reports. For the next 4 decades, it was neither referenced in public hearings nor included in land use recommendations. However, sporadic private records from nearby property owners in Essex County show that individuals continued to pass by the site, sometimes leaving brief remarks in personal ledgers or correspondence. One such record, preserved in the Journal of Surveyor Ellis McRae in 1782, described a client's request to verify stone boundary markers near the convent's northeastern edge. Macabre noted that while the border stones remained intact and visible, the structure beyond appeared exactly as described in older records, closed, clean and quiet. He reported no evidence of trespass or storm damage, despite several recent nor'easters that had affected surrounding areas. Macabre included a single line of additional comment: "No sound heard, but the place does not seem lifeless." A similar notation appears in the inventory ledger of Eleanor Winscombe, who managed agricultural holdings just west of the site. Her seasonal logs from 1785 to 1787 show unexplained irregularities in weather readings recorded near the perimeter. Temperature dips of several degrees were noted during dawn hours, localized within a narrow radius extending from the convent's southern wall. While she did not attribute these anomalies to the structure, she did remark that workers declined to enter the eastern fields after certain dates, citing difficulty concentrating during early morning shifts. No complaints were filed, and Winscombe restructured her planting schedule the following year. By 1790, the structure was no longer listed in active religious directories, but its physical form remained unaltered. An illustration produced for the Essex County Naturalists' Review in 1793, depicting regional architectural oddities, included a rendering of the monastery's exterior. The artist Martin Felder drew attention to the building's unusually narrow windows and lack of corner seams. In an accompanying footnote, Felder remarked that while he had visited many sites of worship throughout the colonies, none showed such persistent uniformity despite absolute disuse. He admitted that he had not attempted to enter the grounds, having been discouraged by his guide, a local student from Salem. Interest in the site gradually increased in the early 1800s due to the rise of amateur antiquarian societies. One such group, the Massachusetts Society for Cloistered History, sent a team of 3 correspondents to document forgotten ecclesiastical holdings in Essex County. Among their destinations was Sancta Resquieta. The resulting report, filed in 1804, noted that the site was without apparent entry but also without deterioration, and included several sketches of the surrounding terrain. Although the society requested permission from diocesan custodians to conduct a closer evaluation, their petition received no reply. An unusual account came from the diary of Jasper Luce, a tradesman who worked as a contracted assistant to the local postal relay. On June 9, 1806, Luce recorded being instructed to retrieve a misrouted delivery that had mistakenly been sent to the convent's old supply drop point near the forked path to Cabot's Crossing. Expecting the package to be uncollected, Luce was surprised to find the area cleared with cart ruts leading away from the spot. The package itself was not present, and the area showed evidence of recent foot traffic. Upon returning to his supervisor with the observation, he was told to disregard the matter, as the site had long been closed. Luce's entry concludes with the remark, "If closed, then someone else has the key." That same year, a county-level property reassessment included Sancta Resquieta as part of a deferred ecclesiastical holdings review. Clerk Henry Sorin was assigned to compile a list of structures eligible for deconsecration or sale. Sorin's report noted that while the convent had technically been condemned, no physical entry had ever been completed. The absence of inspection records made it ineligible for reclassification. He also noted that no title holder could be located, as the original documentation listed only a theological trust that had since dissolved. The convent, therefore, remained an unclaimed asset under perpetual placeholder status. In 1810, a member of the Salem Philosophical Society, Professor Delancey Marwick, made reference to the site in a lecture on colonial religious infrastructure. While acknowledging the lack of data about Sancta Resquieta's operational years, he speculated that the structure may have served as a test site for remote monastic study or as a repository for liturgical artifacts. When asked whether any oral traditions existed among locals regarding its function, Marwick replied that no consistent narrative had emerged. Most who lived in proximity, he stated, either ignored the place entirely or considered it simply not to be dealt with. Despite its dormant legal status, cartographic revisions between 1812 and 1820 continued to include the structure under its original name. A new land survey by Randolph Thornwell placed the building slightly further east than previous records indicated, suggesting possible shifting of terrain or inaccuracies in earlier mappings. Thornwell's notes remark on the unchanging silhouette of the structure and its implausible resistance to time. He noted that even the outer supports for the chapel's lantern tower showed no corrosion, an observation he attributed to either masterful construction or deliberate preservation. Thornwell did not report any interior observations. Between 1823 and 1826, a minor controversy developed regarding tax apportionment for religious holdings, triggered by legislative review of dormant properties. A newly appointed legal assistant, Merritt Greeley, attempted to catalogue all inactive sites for eventual state reclamation. When he encountered Sancta Resquieta's file, he was surprised to find that the convent had neither been seized nor auctioned, despite formal closure nearly 50 years prior. Greeley wrote 3 letters to the diocese requesting clarification and received only one brief reply, which read, "No alteration is authorized." Property remains under protected designation. Greeley filed the letter into public record, adding the annotation, "Query unresolved. Status, maintained, yet inaccessible." This failure to account for the site coincided with the increased availability of weather-resistant materials and reinforced boarding methods, yet photographic documentation of Sancta Resquieta remained non-existent. A traveling lensman, Ephraim Lowe, attempted to capture its facade in 1829 using the daguerreotype process, but later reported that no image formed. He attributed the failure to technical limitations, though his written account concedes that other structures photographed that day produced clear results. Lowe wrote to a colleague in Concord stating, "Whatever design they used, it reflects nothing." By the 1830s, the site had become an anomaly in regional development plans. As Salem and surrounding areas expanded their agricultural and educational infrastructures, most unused land was repurposed or reclassified. Yet Sancta Resquieta remained untouched, its plot bordered but never crossed by new roads or construction. When questioned during a town hall meeting in 1833, the county registrar stated plainly, "There's nothing preventing a survey, but none has succeeded." The matter was closed without action. The absence of any formal ownership or active presence at Sancta Resquieta did not prevent it from appearing on academic rosters and inventory schedules throughout the mid-19th century. In 1839, a clerical reference guide issued by the Boston Registry of Ecclesiastical Holdings listed the property under the designation Remote Study Post, marked as unavailable for visitation. No explanation was provided, and the listing included no staffing records or administrative hierarchy. Nonetheless, the structure retained its registry number and was noted as in good standing. The same year, a visitor from the American Linguistic Heritage Commission, Alton Seaver, made a notation during a regional survey. While traveling through Essex County to document surviving Latin inscriptions in educational institutions, he made an unplanned stop at the former monastery grounds. According to his report, written in dry observational prose, Seaver approached the structure during early daylight and remained on the outer grounds for nearly an hour. He wrote that the building exhibited no wear, that window panes were intact, and that no external boards had been replaced. He concluded the entry by writing, "Soundless, but there is a cadence in the silence." Interest in the convent saw a resurgence in 1844, when the Essex Architectural Inquiry Group attempted to classify defunct religious buildings for preservation or removal. The group dispatched a research team led by historian Martha Elwood, who compiled a report based on land walkthroughs, weather assessments, and historical cross-reference. Elwood's team reached the site in late October and documented the perimeter thoroughly. Her field notes state that despite the heavy rains of the prior season, there was no evidence of drainage failure near the foundations, nor any erosion of the stone causeway. She measured wind pressure against the facade and found no loose masonry. Her concluding observation stated, "No entry point exists. The structure neither admits nor repels. It simply persists." This consistent physical integrity puzzled maintenance analysts brought in for an unrelated infrastructure study in 1848. That year, a minor reservoir had been proposed for the lowland basin south of the monastery tract. Engineers working under the Essex Water Committee conducted soil studies and altitude readings. During this work, one technician recorded barometric inconsistencies at the northern edge of the site, which he attributed to wind channeling. Another noted that the sound of their own movements became less audible within 50 feet of the structure. Though none of these observations were filed as significant, the project shifted its boundary 3/4 of a mile to the east to avoid overlapping with the convent's designated lot. In 1851, a library inventory conducted by the Historical Office of Salem included an entry that listed manuscripts unknown origin, possibly from Sancta Resquieta holdings, acquired without receipt. The materials consisted of 11 parchment folios written in Latin, containing excerpts from Benedictine liturgy with standard annotations. No covers, dates, or author markings were included. The archivist noted that the calligraphy matched 12th century styles, though the ink showed characteristics of more recent composition. A discrepancy in dialect suggested mixed sourcing. No record indicated how or when these materials were received, and none had ever been loaned or displayed. The following year, a letter addressed to the Archdiocese of Boston from a theological assistant, Marcus Lane, requested formal access to the convent for the purpose of comparative structure analysis. Lane had been conducting research on acoustics in cloistered chapels and wanted to observe how Sancta Resquieta had been constructed to support chant-based recitation. He proposed a series of non-invasive studies and agreed to waive any publication rights in exchange for a single guided visit. The Archdiocese never replied. Lane's correspondence file includes a final note in his own hand, reading, "Not declined, just unanswered." Further incidental references appear across the 1850s, usually embedded in broader conversations about land use, clerical policy, or local topography. An 1855 land valuation form lists the property with a 0 assessment due to ecclesiastical exemption, yet also notes undisturbed presence confirmed. In 1857, a brief article in the Salem Courier mentions that monastery near the marshes, which is still there and still not accounted for, though no further detail is given. In 1858, an atlas of Massachusetts includes the site in its map keys under unclassified religious structures, historical, though the accompanying chart includes no photograph or entry. The most detailed observation during this period came from a professor of comparative architecture, Jonathan Calley, who visited the site in 1860 as part of a private project on symmetry and religious structures. Calley, known for his rigid documentation methods, recorded dimensions down to the inch, including stone height, angle of gate fixtures, and window placement. He found that the building's angles deviated from exact 90-degree form by less than a 1/4 inch over the full span of the eastern wall, an unusual precision for 18th century colonial work. He also noted that the alignment of the eastern windows corresponded to astronomical points common in continental cloister design, despite no historical link to such traditions in the region. Calley did not speculate on why this alignment existed. His report ends with the statement, "Inaccessibility continues, integrity preserved, context absent." In 1863, a minor storm caused damage to nearby timber lines, and one report from the county maintenance crew mentions that fallen limbs blocked the road to the convent's outer fence. When the crew returned the following week to remove the obstruction, they found the road cleared. No record exists of who might have completed the task, and no vehicle tracks were found. The maintenance report lists the event as resolved before assignment. By the time the diocesan archives were updated in 1867, Sancta Resquieta appeared only in the appendices. A marginal note by the record keeper stated, "Inactive, inaccessible, unrepurposed, entry not scheduled." With ecclesiastical focus shifting to urban centers, the property faded from operational awareness, yet it remained listed not as decommissioned but as withheld from functional review. No procedures were initiated for sale or structural audit. In 1871, a group of local historians requested access to conduct a centennial commemoration of early religious institutions in the county. Their proposal included plans for exterior sketching, soil sampling, and a perimeter reading of ambient acoustics. The proposal was sent with a list of 20 properties, including Sancta Resquieta. The reply, signed by a senior archivist, read, "All requests approved except item 17. That property remains under ecclesiastical quietus." Item 17 referred to the convent. In the winter of 1874, a notice was filed by the Regional Planning Council regarding unmonitored structures within flood zones. While Sancta Resquieta was not within direct flood range, the notice requested confirmation of drainage integrity and land stability. No representative responded. However, the structure was excluded from final hazard mapping with a brief annotation, "No history of complaint, claim, or change." The transition from obscurity to formal investigation began not with a decree, but with an error in classification. In early 1877, during a general audit of deferred ecclesiastical holdings in Massachusetts, Clerical Registrar Simon Daltrey identified an inconsistency in Sancta Resquieta's file. The structure was still listed as inactive but maintained, yet the signature field for annual reaffirmation had been blank for over 12 years. Diocesan policy required signatures from designated custodians even for properties under clerical exception. Daltrey, seeking only to update the file, submitted a verification form to the Archdiocese and received no reply. After 2 more attempts, each returned unopened, he included a personal note with the 3rd mailing. It read, "If there is no longer a custodian, I request guidance on retirement procedure." 3 weeks later, Daltrey received a response from an unfamiliar office within the diocese, signed by an individual named A. Turnis, whose position was not listed. The note was brief. "Custodianship remains as recorded. No intervention necessary. Do not amend status." There was no return address. Daltrey filed the correspondence but noted in his ledger, "Name not recognized. Not on diocesan personnel rolls." This irregularity prompted him to consult the Central Ecclesiastical Register in Boston. There, he confirmed that no person named A. Turnis had ever been assigned to the Office of Property Oversight or any of its adjunct bureaus. The discovery did not lead to any official action. Daltrey, known for his methodical temperament, merely documented the finding and closed the file. But he did mention the event to a colleague, Harold Bessing, who was preparing a lecture on abandoned religious estates. Bessing included the detail as an aside in a footnote, which circulated in an internal report published by the Salem Historical Society in August of that year. The following month, an archivist named Olivia Wren requested to view Sancta Resquieta's file while researching 18th-century ecclesiastical charters. Upon examining the original charter of 1758, she noted a phrase that had not appeared in any published accounts: "ad usum clausurae perpetuae," a designation typically reserved for monasteries undergoing permanent internal reflection or withdrawal. This status had not been used in Massachusetts for any other institution and was more commonly applied in pre-Reformation continental orders. Wren cross-referenced the phrase with Vatican holdings via a contact in the Roman Archive Bureau. The reply she received confirmed the phrase's existence, but noted that its use had been deprecated in all formal charters by the mid-1600s. Its reappearance in 1758 was, according to the reply, extraordinary and unapproved. Wren submitted her findings to the diocesan office in Boston, along with a request to examine related correspondence from the original founding period. She received no reply for 6 weeks. When she contacted the archive in person, she was informed that the Sancta Resquieta files had been temporarily removed for inventory control. When she asked when the materials would be available again, the clerk responded that no timeline had been given and that the request should be resubmitted at a later date. Despite the setback, Wren's research was cited in an academic colloquium on monastic legal terminology at Harvard in 1878. Her observations prompted a short paper by Professor Bernard Elwey of the Divinity School, who speculated that Sancta Resquieta had been established under a vestigial clause carried from European clerical frameworks by misinformed agents. His paper was never published, but was circulated privately among scholars with access to the ecclesiastical archives. One reader, a Jesuit historian named Abraham Coll, contacted Wren directly and proposed a joint petition to formally examine the structure. He argued that regardless of theological status, the building had become a matter of institutional curiosity deserving of structured review. Their petition was filed with the Salem Office of Religious Holdings in January 1879. The request was drafted with neutral language and framed as an archival recovery operation. It proposed a site visit, limited to the exterior and accompanied by a neutral surveyor, with no intention of opening the structure. The language was carefully chosen to avoid triggering procedural denial. In March, the petition was approved under the condition that only visual perimeter documentation would occur, and no entry would be attempted. On April 7, 1879, Wren, Coll and their surveyor, Edwin Sorrell, arrived at the edge of the property accompanied by 2 administrative observers. They found the site unchanged. The outer grounds remained free of debris, the gate unlatched but stationary, the walkway cleared of any recent detritus. Sorrell's readings recorded negligible environmental wear on the external stonework, and measurements taken against earlier architectural notes confirmed that no exterior shift had occurred. The group remained for 4 hours, taking sketches and recording measurements, then departed without incident. Their report concluded that the structure was in stable condition, structurally unbreached, and consistent with historical descriptions. 10 days later, Wren submitted a request to retrieve the previously withheld documents from the diocesan archive. This time she received a notice that the documents were no longer part of the Boston registry, but had been transferred to an auxiliary record location. No details were provided, and the auxiliary location itself was not identified. She contacted her former reference at the Roman Archive Bureau, but was informed that no cross-requests or international filings related to Sancta Resquieta had been received since her last inquiry. In June 1879, a maintenance crew assigned to reroute boundary fencing for a nearby estate noted that fresh tracks were visible along the northern perimeter of the monastery property. The tracks, described as evenly spaced and narrow, did not match known animal patterns or common footwear. The foreman submitted the observation as a routine note in the project ledger, but was not asked to investigate further. Later that summer, Abraham Coll returned to the property alone. In his private journal, preserved in the Elwey Special Collection, he recorded observing faint tonal activity during morning hours. He wrote, "Chant pattern consistent with pre-19th century cadence. Not amplified. No movement observed. Duration, approximately 16 minutes. Coll made no mention of the language used, but noted that the rhythm matched Benedictine Matins cycles. He did not notify the diocese or publish the observation. The final documented event of 1879 came from a letter written by Edwin Sorrell to Olivia Wren in September. He reported that he had received a parcel by anonymous courier containing 4 vellum sheets with marginalia, matching the calligraphy style noted in 1851. There was no return address, and the courier did not speak. The sheets contained liturgical citations without commentary, arranged in no discernible order. Sorrell offered them to the Salem Office of Ecclesiastical Review, which declined to accept them due to lack of provenance. The sheets were later placed into the Wren-Coll working file, where they remain. By the end of the year, the file for Sancta Resquieta had grown to include multiple inquiries, structural reports, and external references, yet no agency moved to reassess its standing. The property remained classified as protected under ecclesiastical designation, exempt from further review. No new custodians were named, and no reassignment requests were filed. Its formal designation remained unchanged. In the spring of 1880, an inquiry was submitted by the Essex Historical Reconciliation Bureau requesting verification of all ecclesiastical properties still holding legal designation without identifiable use. Sancta Resquieta appeared on the Bureau's secondary list, flagged as a potential clerical artifact. The inquiry was procedural, with no mandate for field verification. Nonetheless, it triggered a sequence of correspondence among archivists, each attempting to locate any document that might clarify the site's present custodial arrangement. No such document was located. A notation appended to the inquiry file stated, "Continues under uncontacted stewardship. No financial irregularities noted." That summer, cartographer Byron Neal undertook a reassessment of border properties in Essex County. His project focused on aligning older ecclesiastical holdings with new administrative boundaries established by state reorganization. When he reached the vicinity of Sancta Resquieta, he found that the adjoining surveyor's benchmark had been altered, though not recently. The new benchmark marker had been etched into stone using techniques Neal described as not in use since pre-industrial classification. He compared the markings to those used in Benedictine properties in northern Italy. In his personal sketchbook, Neal wrote, "The boundary has shifted not physically, but in designation. The land defines itself." Around the same time, agricultural planner Ellery Foswick made reference to Sancta Resquieta in an unrelated review. Assigned to examine moisture retention in fallow plots near marsh-adjacent tracts, he recorded an anomaly in soil conductivity just outside the convent's western fence. The data showed abnormal consistency over a 30-foot band, with no variance despite rainfall fluctuations. Foswick included the note, "Zone matches no known drainage or substrate classification. Recommend exclusion from irrigation assessment." The notation was accepted, and the tract was left uncategorized. As minor references to the property accumulated in otherwise unrelated disciplines, it became evident that the building's persistence in records was not the result of neglect, but rather a peculiar form of silent inclusion. It was never flagged for correction, never marked as dormant in final form, and never deleted. The language used in each record maintained a tone of passive confirmation, still standing unchanged, not in use, not in need of intervention. In October 1881, an archivist named Helen Sparr identified a cross-reference in a storage ledger from the old Salem seminary, indicating that a hymnal belonging to Sancta Resquieta had been catalogued under the institution's active materials until 1842. The entry listed a code for rotation withdrawal, suggesting that the hymnal had been requested for use elsewhere. No destination was given. Sparr, unsure whether the item had ever existed in physical form, contacted the depository. She was informed that the shelf assigned to the code still existed, but was empty. The slot had never been reassigned. Her follow-up memo noted, "An item from an inactive institution was recorded as withdrawn post-closure. Retrieval cannot be verified. Destination absent." She placed the file into the General Findings folder, but did not pursue the matter further. In the following year, renewed attention came from a doctoral candidate in ecclesiastical history, Frederick Illings, who had been conducting a comparative study of silent charters. Illings visited the diocesan archive in Boston and requested access to the oldest available registry entries for Sancta Resquieta. He was provided with partial folios containing the charter's introduction and subsequent boundary maps. But several pages, including the original correspondence of founding clerics, had been replaced with notation slips reading, "Removed under permanent retention." When Illings asked what the retention order entailed, he was informed that some documents were designated as uncirculated by long-standing ecclesiastical decree. No date of removal was provided. Illings was permitted to photograph the existing pages, which included marginal annotations in Latin. Upon translating the comments, he discovered phrases referencing internal cycle completion, architectural shielding, and a repeated clause, "Non patefacere nisi ex mandato." The phrase, loosely rendered, translates as "not to be opened unless by mandate." Illings could not locate any subsequent reference to such a mandate in available diocesan procedure. He documented the phrase in his thesis appendix, noting its lack of application elsewhere. In early 1883, a professor of antiquarian theology, Clara Vexley, took interest in Illings's findings and requested access to the structure for comparative acoustic study. She had previously worked on sealed chapels in the Hudson Valley and argued that even without entry, Sancta Resquieta's structural resonance could offer insight into colonial monastic acoustics. Her request was passed to the diocese and held without reply for 6 months. When she followed up, she was told that the property was no longer considered accessible under its existing designation. Vexley requested the designation itself for review, but was informed that it was classified under internal archival reference only. No documentation was sent. That summer, Vexley traveled to Essex and attempted to study the site from the exterior. Her field notes, held in the University of Salem collection, record that she stationed herself outside the western elevation for 4 consecutive mornings to capture any ambient frequencies. Her equipment recorded ambient silence, interrupted once by low harmonic resonance which she described as not mechanical, not wind-borne, and not repeatable. No tone was detected on subsequent days. During her final morning session, Vexley made a drawing of the upper chapel window, noting that it reflected no identifiable exterior light. According to her notes, sunlight was present in the surrounding field, but not within the visible bounds of the window aperture. She described the visual effect as subtractive, rather than obscuring. No other observers were present. Vexley did not attempt further study. The year closed with no changes in the property's legal or ecclesiastical standing, yet by this point, multiple files, across disciplines, carried annotations referencing Sancta Resquieta as an unresolved entity. Each note used slightly different language, but all shared a common implication. The site existed, was not occupied, had no functional designation, yet remained maintained and unexamined. No government initiative was ever launched to clarify the structure's status. Local administrations continued to list the property as under ecclesiastical protection. Diocesan files did not indicate any intent to review or deactivate. The building's name remained on structural maps, appended only by the phrase "active under internal process." No clarification of the process was ever provided. By the early 1880s, the name Sancta Resquieta had become a shorthand among archivists for unresolved properties, sites still listed, still intact, yet permanently excluded from institutional discourse. While most ecclesiastical buildings underwent inspection at least once per decade, this site remained without any documented physical entry since the late 18th century. Over time, its presence took on the form of a structural placeholder, legally persistent, spatially unaltered, but functionally absent. In 1885, a proposal emerged from the Salem Committee for Historical Alignment to consolidate records of long-standing but inactive properties. The goal was to reduce archival redundancy by identifying holdings with no foreseeable use. Sancta Resquieta was included in the proposal's second tier of targets for symbolic decommissioning. The process would involve legal delisting, followed by transfer of record to a sealed auxiliary volume. Though no physical alteration was intended, the act would officially acknowledge that the building no longer served its founding role. The proposal was submitted to the diocesan office for preliminary review. Within 2 weeks, a letter was issued from an auxiliary signatory, stating that the building's status was permanently reserved under chartered silence and therefore ineligible for symbolic closure. The phrase was not recognized by the committee and did not correspond to any known policy. No individual name accompanied the letter. It was signed only with an abbreviated ecclesiastical seal not found in the current registry. While the committee opted not to pursue the matter further, a clerk named Samuel Payne attached a handwritten supplement to the official records, listing all properties designated permanently reserved in any form. Sancta Resquieta was the only one. His note ended with the line, "No administrative counterpart exists in parallel." That same year, an urban development surveyor named Horace Fells visited the site to assess its potential impact on proposed road expansion. His report, filed with the Essex County Infrastructure Office, confirmed that the structure obstructed no routes and required no adjustment to regional plans. However, he included a comment regarding measurement irregularities. When placing survey markers, Fells recorded a repeating drift in magnetic readings as he approached the building's northern edge. The deviation returned to baseline upon retreat. He verified his equipment on adjacent properties and found no similar variation. His report listed the anomaly as non-impactful but unresolved. The following year, a request was filed by the State Registry of Non-Taxable Holdings to update all ecclesiastical property records with current photographs. The project was part of a broader initiative to compile visual documentation of surviving religious architecture across the state. Photographers were dispatched regionally, and Sancta Resquieta appeared on the Essex list. Assigned to the site was Joseph Lunt, a contract photographer with experience in architectural documentation. Lunt visited the location in early July 1886. According to his field log, he arrived at 5:40 a.m. and began preparations for still exposure. His setup included a standard large-format box camera and glass plate negatives prepared the night before. He remained on site until nearly 9 a.m., attempting 4 exposures from varying distances. None produced a viable image. Each plate developed to full opacity, without indication of underexposure or mechanical fault. Lunt returned 2 weeks later with replacement equipment, this time bringing a colleague to assist. The result was identical. In his report, Lunt stated, "Equipment confirmed functional at alternate sites. No obstruction, no excessive light. Image does not register. Attempted standard and long exposure. Outcome constant." Conclusion: unphotographable under current conditions. No additional sessions were scheduled. The project coordinator marked the file as incomplete and added a notation: "No photographic record obtained. Plate failure unexplained." In parallel with the failed photographic attempts, renewed academic attention was drawn to the site by the publication of Frederick Illing's completed thesis. Circulated privately within theological faculties, the document included references to withheld diocesan documents and incomplete charter history. A copy reached the Ecclesiastical Policy Review Board in late 1886. The board issued a brief inquiry to the Boston Diocese, requesting clarity on the institution's designation. No answer was provided. The board issued no follow-up. A more unexpected mention occurred in the 1887 annual report of the Massachusetts Postal Scheduling Office. While detailing mail reroutes in the Salem region, the report included a short paragraph on delivery inconsistencies to legacy drop points. Among them was a footpath junction listed as Delivery Point 6C, former academic monastery. The report indicated that parcels marked with the legacy code had occasionally been removed, despite the absence of an active recipient. The behavior was listed as logistical anomaly, and the code was retired the following fiscal year. In 1888, a routine cartographic update was commissioned by the Historical Map Bureau. The project included creation of new reference overlays for pre-1800 religious structures still physically intact. During this process, mapmaker Lydia Rowell visited the site to gather updated sketches. Her notes indicate that she maintained a consistent 30-foot distance from the walls, using a viewfinder to approximate dimensions. Despite multiple observational passes, she found it difficult to produce a coherent frontal depiction. She wrote, "Elevation stable, features consistent, yet alignment resists full translation to grid. Vanishing points unstable." That same year, a new filing was added to the diocesan archive from an unidentified clerical source. The entry, written in abbreviated Latin, listed Sancta Resquieta under a newly assigned header, retinenda in statu. The phrase loosely translates as "to be retained in condition." The document contained no date, no author, and no accompanying explanation. Its presence was noted by a junior archivist, who flagged it for review. No action was taken. The file was not removed. As the decade drew to a close, attention to the site diminished. No new proposals were issued, and no public records indicated any attempt to reassess, reclassify, or investigate. Yet throughout the state's records, its presence remained acknowledged in the same terms: not active, not abandoned, not in use, not in decline. It stood outside the cycle of reassignment that applied to every other clerical holding in the region. In files across civic planning, postal logistics, cartography, and theological study, Sancta Resquieta continued to occupy a defined but functionless space. A building not used, not altered, and not claimed, but also never let go. In 1891, the Massachusetts Office of Property Review initiated a final round of clerical estate reconciliations. The process aimed to verify all known religious holdings for compliance with updated jurisdictional boundaries, now standardized across counties. Sancta Resquieta, still registered under its original 1758 charter, appeared as one of 12 properties requiring resolution. While most entries listed known custodians or dissolution plans, the convent's file remained unchanged. Its status line read, "Preserved under self-declared retention." Review Officer Thomas Krauntz submitted a formal request to the diocese for clarification. The response came by envelope bearing an unmarked seal. Inside was a single sentence, "Entry deferred under condition of origin." No additional documentation was included. Krauntz filed the note with the annotation, "Entity acknowledged, condition undefined." That same year, local property appraiser Felton Weiss attempted to map the perimeter for fiscal records. His logs, now held in the Essex Fiscal Register, detail his initial impressions upon arrival. The grounds remained stable, foliage maintained, and boundary markers intact. His measurements of the exterior matched previous assessments. However, in his second entry, he noted a limitation in depth scanning tools, which failed to detect foundation layering beyond the initial stonework. He attributed this to an unusually high mineral density in the soil, but remarked that the building presents as both finished and unextended, its underside unreadable. Weiss recommended no changes to tax status, citing lack of accessible variance. His report was signed off without revision. In 1893, the Salem Board of Records was approached by the Massachusetts Clerical Registry to contribute source material for a forthcoming compendium of pre-revolutionary monastic structures. When compiling the section for Essex County, Registrar Ellen Torworth included Sancta Resquieta, but noted a complete absence of internal schematics. All diagrams on file consisted of perimeter sketches only. No plans existed for internal layouts, room counts, or materials beyond facade composition. Torworth submitted an inter-office query to the Diocesan Bureau of Historical Layouts. The Bureau replied that no interior schematics had ever been filed, nor had any requests for access been granted since structural completion. The reply closed with the sentence, "The matter rests outside current jurisdiction." At the same time, a visiting cleric from New Haven, Benedict Farrell, made a private pilgrimage to sites associated with early Benedictine presence in New England. Farrell documented his visit to Sancta Resquieta in his personal correspondence, describing the location as exactly where the absence resides. Though he offered no theological interpretation, his phrasing was later cited in a review of clerical phrasing traditions. In 1895, a land use consortium attempted to acquire dormant ecclesiastical plots for conversion into educational green spaces. A list of 74 properties was submitted for potential repurposing, Sancta Resquieta among them. Within 2 weeks, 67 were cleared for conditional review. 6 required additional legal processing. 1, listed last on the form, received a separate response from a contact not present on any accompanying documentation. The note read, "Hold from offer, source matter unresolved." The consortium removed the convent from its proposal. No further action was taken. That same year, an assistant registrar from the Boston Theological Archives, Mara Kensley, received an anonymous donation of 4 wax-sealed envelopes containing extracts of liturgical text. Each was labeled with a date range corresponding to years after the monastery's recorded closure. The texts were written in standard Latin, but formatted in a dialect not previously catalogued in New England monastic use. Kensley submitted the materials for academic review, and while the content was deemed consistent with accepted doctrine, the formatting raised questions about source context. No origin or delivery information accompanied the materials. Kensley filed them under speculative annex, noting, "Sequence incompatible with cessation timeline." Throughout 1896, scattered references to Sancta Resquieta continued to appear in public records, always accompanied by procedural phrases such as unverified, retained, or not under review. None included direct evaluation. In early November, a maintenance routing chart listed the property among enclaved historical sites, for which road access signage was not required. The designation remained unchanged through the year. In 1897, no new documentation was generated. In 1898, the diocesan records underwent another routine consolidation, during which several inactive entries were archived. Sancta Resquieta was included in the review, but once again withheld from closure. A notation written in Latin script but appended to an English-language document read, "Quietum per ius silenti." The phrase, loosely translated, implies a settlement by right of silence. The year concluded with no additional entries. In 1899, a general review of Massachusetts' historical structures included a section titled, "Unentered but Extant." Sancta Resquieta led the list. The accompanying paragraph stated, "Building is intact, site is preserved, interior is unknown, purpose now classified as referential." The final annotation in the public register from that year marked the structure as perpetually undeclared. Its name did not appear in any recorded materials thereafter. If this story impacted you, if you stayed until the end, it's because you feel these hidden truths also need to be exposed. So leave in the comments the city you're watching from. This way, we can see how far these stories are reaching. And subscribe to the channel. There are many other cases the world tried to forget, but we insist on remembering. This story was taken from documents that were found. All names have been edited to protect the source.